Welcome to today's explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this because it's a wild one. Picture this, it's a bitter, freezing village night. It is totally silent, wrapped in this unnatural heavy darkness. And a simple, everyday farming chore is about to turn into an absolute nightmare. Today we're breaking down the anatomy of a haunting from the chilling story Tandkiwo Darawinirat, which translates to That Terrifying Cold Night. By looking closely at the source material, we're going to explore the psychological buildup, the environmental triggers, and the terrifying climax of this local legend.
But before we trace the timeline of these events, listen to this warning from the village elder Dadaji. He says, "It doesn't even spare a man's shadow." Think about that for a second. This establishes the stakes right away. We aren't just dealing with your standard run-of-the-mill jump scare ghost story here. We are dealing with a highly aggressive, predatory force that consumes everything, literally down to a person's very shadow.
So I really want to pose this question to you as we kick off our analysis today. Would you go to a place where a shadow is waiting for you in the dark? Think about what would compel a person to leave the safety of their home to face the unknown. For our main character, Govind, the motivation was purely practical. It was just about agricultural survival. But as we'll see, practicality often blinds us to very, very real danger.
Section 1, Electricity and First Warning.
So, for days, the village has been sitting in complete, oppressive darkness. Then, out of nowhere, the electricity returns. We see this happen at Birju Chacha's dimly lit fish shop. The flickering bulb gives Govind this massive, false sense of security. He sees the light and immediately thinks, "Great, I can finally go water my dry crops at the old well." And this brilliantly illustrates a classic horror mechanism. Hope and convenience are so often used to lure the protagonist straight into the trap.
But as you might expect, not everyone shares Govind's optimism. Birju Chacha gives him a dire warning, saying that place is no longer fit for the living. Be careful, son. Now Govind completely brushes this off as just old village superstition. He is so incredibly focused on his crops and taking advantage of the temporary electricity that he completely ignores the sheer terror etched right onto the older man's face.
Section 2, Ignored Warnings and Journey.
Notice how these warnings perfectly form a classic rule of three. Govind is warned not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. First, Birju Chacha tells him to wait for morning. Second, his wife, Madhuri, feels this heavy dread and begs him not to go. Finally, Dadaji stops him in the alley with that terrifying warning about the shadow. Govind fatally ignores all 3, writing them all off as irrational fears.
So Govind sets off and he meets his friend Vikas on the way, who actually agrees to accompany him. As they walk, the environment paints an incredibly eerie picture. The village streets are completely silent. There are no dogs barking, and if you know your folklore, that is a classic sign that something unnatural is present. They walk under these dim yellow bulbs through a heavy, unnatural quiet. The environment itself is literally screaming at them to turn back, but they keep walking into the dark.
Section 3, The Terrifying Silence, a Field.
When they finally arrive, Govind goes straight to the old motor strapped to a tree. The rusty switch is flipped, and water flows into the dark field. There's this brief, false moment of relief. The machine works. The heavy silence is broken by the reassuring roar of the motor. Govind tells Vikas to just stay by the tree while he walks down into the dark field to check on the crops.
Meanwhile, Vikas is left totally alone by the motor, surrounded by this heavy, isolating silence as Govind completely disappears into the darkness. And what does he do to pass the time? He pulls out his smartphone and gets completely engrossed in a horror video. The irony here is just incredible, right? He isolates himself in digital horror, completely unaware that actual physical horror is literally creeping up right behind his back in the freezing dark.
Section 4, Terrifying Shadow and the End.
Right as the suspense in Vikas's video peaks, cut. The motor stops completely. Just a sharp mechanical snap and then absolute dead silence drops over the field again. This shock moment is the absolute turning point of the explainer. The one thing keeping the darkness at bay, the loud, reliable motor, has just been killed by an unseen force.
Govind storms back from the field, and you can see a rapid spike in panic. He instantly blames Vikas for turning it off, angrily asking why he touched it. But Vikas is paralyzed with fear and swears he never touched the tight switch. He points out that the switch is incredibly stiff, like it takes serious physical force to move it, meaning something out there deliberately shut it down.
Here, we see the manifestation of the entity, an adrishya saya, or an invisible shadow. Govind gets frustrated and tries to force the switch back up, but before his hand even touches it, an unseen freezing force violently pushes him backward. At that exact moment, Vikas sees a massive, dark shadow manifest right over the switch, basically confirming their absolute worst fears.
And then comes the moment that completely breaks their courage. They hear a slow, terrifying scratching sound from inside the iron motor box. It sounds exactly like nails scraping metal. Keep in mind, the motor box is locked and sealed. Whatever is in there making that bone-chilling sound isn't just a wisp of a ghost. It has a physical presence, it has claws, and it is trying to get out.
What follows is pure, unfiltered panic. First, they grab each other's hands in absolute terror. Then, they run blindly along the field borders, just totally desperate to reach the distant lights. And as they run, a distorted, terrifying laugh echoes from the darkness right behind them, chasing them on the freezing wind. The psychological break is complete at this point. Survival is literally their only thought.
Govind and Vikas survived, but they never, ever returned to that field. The legend says the haunting is strictly bound to moonless nights, known as Amawasya. To this very day, locals report hearing those exact same scratching sounds from the sealed motor box, along with eerie, desperate voices begging for water from the dark well.
This brilliantly illustrates how a local legend is born and cemented into a culture. We've traced the ignored warnings, the environmental shifts, and the terrifying encounter. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing exactly what lurks by that old well, and knowing what happened to Govind and Vikas, would you dare step into those dark fields on a moonless night? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the shadows.